Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for over 14 years, and throughout that time, he had witnessed countless family dynamics play out on his stage. He had seen families that functioned with seamless coordination, families that bickered playfully, families that struggled with communication, and families that clearly carried unresolved tensions beneath their competitive energy. His years of experience had taught him to read the subtle signals that indicated when something more serious lay beneath the surface of family interactions. What happened on that spring afternoon in March 2025 would challenge his understanding of forgiveness, marriage, and the complex dynamics of emotional abuse in ways he had never anticipated. It would result in a moment of television that forced difficult conversations about what healthy relationships look like, and when forgiveness becomes enabling rather than healing. Before examining this profound and troubling incident in detail, if you value content that addresses difficult relationship dynamics and explores the difference between genuine reconciliation and harmful patterns of abuse, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share stories that tackle challenging subjects with sensitivity and honesty, helping viewers recognize unhealthy patterns and understand what true respect in relationships should look like. The Peterson family from Nashville, Tennessee, stood ready to compete against the Williams family from Charlotte, North Carolina. The Peterson family consisted of 41-year-old Michael Peterson, his wife Rachel, who was 38, their 2 adult children, and Michael's brother. From the very first moments of their introduction, something about the dynamic between Michael and Rachel struck the production staff as unusual. Michael spoke over Rachel repeatedly, correcting her statements and interjecting his own commentary whenever she attempted to share anything about herself or the family. Rachel would start to speak, only to fall silent mid-sentence when Michael interrupted, her expression shifting to something that looked like practiced resignation rather than momentary annoyance. During the brief pre-game conversation where Steve typically asked families lighthearted questions about their backgrounds and interests, Michael took it upon himself to answer every question Steve directed at Rachel. When Steve asked Rachel about her work as an elementary school teacher, Michael answered that she taught 3rd grade, but that the job was not particularly demanding and mostly involved babysitting. When Steve asked Rachel about the family's hobbies, Michael explained that Rachel did not have hobbies because she was not very good at sticking with things and tended to give up on activities after a short time. Each comment was delivered with a smile and a tone that might have sounded like playful teasing to someone not paying close attention, but the cumulative effect was clearly diminishing and disrespectful. Steve's expression grew increasingly uncomfortable as this pattern continued. He made several attempts to redirect questions specifically to Rachel, asking her directly for her own perspective and creating conversational space for her to speak without Michael's interference. However, Rachel seemed almost unable to assert herself even when given explicit opportunity. She would glance at Michael before answering, as though seeking permission or checking whether her response would be acceptable. When she did speak, her answers were brief and often trailed off into apologetic uncertainty, particularly if Michael's expression suggested disapproval. The game began with this uncomfortable dynamic already established, and it only intensified as competition added pressure to the existing tensions. During the first round, Rachel provided an answer that was not on the board. This was a completely normal occurrence in Family Feud that happened to virtually every contestant at some point during their game. However, Michael's response to Rachel's incorrect answer was far from normal. He threw up his hands in theatrical frustration, shook his head with exaggerated disappointment, and announced loudly that he had told her what to say, and she had given a different answer anyway, proving once again that she could not follow simple instructions. The audience responded with uncomfortable laughter that sounded forced and uncertain, as though people were not sure whether Michael's reaction was intended as humor or represented genuine anger. Rachel's face flushed red with embarrassment, but she smiled in a way that appeared automatic rather than genuine, as though she had learned to perform good humor in response to humiliation. Steve paused the game briefly to remind all contestants that Family Feud was about supporting one another, and that incorrect answers were part of the fun rather than failures that deserved criticism. He looked directly at Michael as he said this, making his intended audience for the message unmistakably clear. The pattern continued through subsequent rounds. When Rachel provided a correct answer that appeared on the board, Michael took credit for it by announcing that he had suggested that answer to her before her turn. When she made strategic decisions about whether to play or pass, Michael overruled her choices and explained to Steve and the audience that Rachel was not good at strategy and should not be trusted with important decisions. When she scored points for the family, Michael minimized her contribution. When she made any mistake, Michael made certain everyone noticed and understood that the error was solely her fault and reflected her inadequacy rather than the normal challenges of game show competition. The breaking point came during a round where the question asked contestants to name something people do to show love to their spouse. Rachel rang in first and won the face-off, giving her family control of the question. She answered that people tell their spouse they are appreciated. It was a thoughtful and loving answer that immediately appeared on the board as the number 2 response, with 36 points. It should have been a moment of celebration for Rachel and her family. Instead, Michael used it as an opportunity for what would become the most disturbing moment of the entire episode. Michael turned to Rachel in front of the studio audience, the cameras, and everyone watching, and said with a smile that managed to be both condescending and cruel that it was ironic she would give that answer, since she clearly did not feel appreciated despite everything he did for her. He explained that Rachel was constantly complaining about feeling undervalued even though he provided her with a nice home, allowed her to work at a job she enjoyed, and put up with her emotional neediness and frequent mistakes. He said that some women just could not be satisfied no matter how much their husbands sacrificed and tolerated. The studio fell into shocked silence. What had been uncomfortable throughout the game had now crossed clearly into emotional abuse being performed publicly as though it were normal marital dynamics. Rachel stood frozen at the podium, her smile fixed in place, but her eyes filled with tears that she was clearly fighting to hold back. Her children looked mortified and angry, clearly wanting to defend their mother, but uncertain how to intervene in such a public setting. The audience sat in stunned quiet, processing what they had just witnessed and recognizing that this was not playful teasing, but rather genuine cruelty disguised as humor. Steve Harvey stopped the game immediately. He held up his hand to signal the production crew to cut cameras and told everyone they were taking an unscheduled break. His expression had transformed from his usual warm engagement to something much darker and more serious. He walked directly to where Michael and Rachel stood with their family and addressed Michael with controlled but unmistakable anger. He told Michael that what he had just said and done was not funny, not acceptable, and not something that would be allowed to continue on his stage. Steve explained that he had been watching Michael belittle and undermine Rachel throughout the entire game, that he had given Michael multiple opportunities to recognize his behavior and adjust course, and that Michael had instead escalated to explicitly humiliating his wife on national television. He made clear that this treatment of a spouse was not normal, not healthy, and not something that would be tolerated or treated as entertainment. He told Michael that he needed to apologize to Rachel sincerely and immediately, or the Peterson family would be removed from the competition entirely. Michael's response was telling and deeply troubling. He became defensive and dismissive, insisting that Steve was overreacting to normal marital dynamics and that Rachel understood he was just joking around. He claimed that he and Rachel had this kind of playful banter all the time and that she was not actually hurt by his comments. He suggested that Steve was imposing his own relationship standards on a marriage he knew nothing about and had no right to judge. His tone carried the unmistakable implication that Steve was interfering in private matters that were none of his concern. Before Steve could respond to Michael's defensive justifications, something unexpected happened. Rachel spoke up for the first time with genuine emotion and clarity rather than the hesitant, apologetic tone she had used throughout the game. She told Michael that she was hurt by his comments and had been hurt by his treatment of her for a very long time. She said that she was not okay with being constantly criticized, corrected, and humiliated both privately and now publicly. She explained that she had learned to smile and pretend his comments were jokes because fighting back only made things worse, but that his behavior was not playful and she was not fine with it. The studio remained absolutely silent as Rachel continued speaking, her voice growing stronger even as tears rolled down her face. She told Michael that she worked a demanding job that she loved, that she was a good mother to their children, and that she managed their household while also dealing with his constant criticism and impossible standards. She said that she had tried for years to be good enough to earn his respect and approval, but had finally realized that nothing she did would ever be enough because the problem was not her inadequacy, but rather his need to maintain control and superiority by keeping her feeling small and insufficient. Michael's expression shifted from defensive annoyance to genuine shock. He clearly had not anticipated that Rachel would use this moment to confront him so directly and publicly. He attempted to backtrack, telling Rachel that she was being overly emotional and taking things too seriously, that he loved her and was just trying to help her improve, and that her sensitivity was making a minor issue into a major drama. He said that if she would just accept his guidance and stop being so defensive, they would not have these problems. What happened next was what prompted Steve Harvey to make the decision to stop the show entirely. Rachel, hearing Michael's response, which minimized her feelings and blamed her for being hurt by his hurtful behavior, did something that shocked everyone watching. She apologized to Michael. She told him that he was right, that she was being too sensitive, and that she should not have made a scene on television. She said that she knew he loved her and was trying to help her be better, and that she would try harder to accept his feedback without getting emotional. She asked him to forgive her for embarrassing him in front of everyone. Steve Harvey stood completely still, staring at Rachel with an expression of profound pain and disbelief. The audience seemed to collectively hold its breath, sensing that something significant was happening, but uncertain what it meant or how to respond. Steve walked over to Rachel and asked her to look at him directly. When she met his eyes, he asked her a simple question. He wanted to know if she genuinely believed she owed Michael an apology, or if she was apologizing because she had learned that apologizing was easier and safer than standing up for herself. Rachel's facade crumbled completely. She began sobbing openly, her body shaking with the force of emotions that had clearly been suppressed for a very long time. Through her tears, she admitted that she apologized constantly for things that were not her fault, that she had learned to take blame to avoid conflict, and that she no longer knew what she actually believed versus what she said to keep peace. She said that she loved Michael and wanted to believe he loved her, but that his treatment of her made her feel worthless and inadequate no matter what she achieved or how hard she tried. She said that she kept forgiving him and trying harder because she believed that was what commitment and marriage required. Steve made a decision in that moment that would generate significant controversy, but that he would later defend as necessary and right. He told Rachel that what she was describing was not love and commitment, but rather an abusive dynamic where she had been conditioned to accept mistreatment and blame herself for her abuser's behavior. He explained that healthy relationships involved mutual respect, that criticism should be constructive and occasional rather than constant and destructive, and that apologizing for being hurt by hurtful behavior was a sign of psychological manipulation rather than personal weakness. He turned to Michael and addressed him with unmistakable severity. He told Michael that his treatment of Rachel throughout the game had revealed patterns consistent with emotional abuse and coercive control. He explained that belittling a partner, correcting them constantly, taking credit for their successes while blaming them for failures, and making them feel inadequate were all tactics used to maintain power and control in relationships. He said that Michael's response to being confronted, which involved minimizing Rachel's feelings and blaming her for being too sensitive, was textbook manipulation. Steve announced that he would not continue with the game under these circumstances. He explained that allowing the competition to proceed would send a message that Michael's behavior was acceptable or normal, and that watching Rachel forgive abuse in real time without intervention would make the show complicit in perpetuating harmful dynamics. He told the Peterson family that they were being removed from the competition, but more importantly, he told Rachel that she deserved support and resources to evaluate her marriage and her options with clarity rather than the fog of manipulation and conditioning. Steve called for a domestic violence advocate he had worked with previously to come to the studio immediately. He arranged for Rachel to speak with this professional privately, away from Michael and the cameras, to discuss her situation and receive information about resources available to people in emotionally abusive relationships. He made clear that what happened next was Rachel's choice and hers alone, but that she deserved to make that choice with accurate information about what healthy relationships looked like and what options existed for people who wanted to change their circumstances. Michael became angry and aggressive when he realized his family was being removed from the show and that Steve was connecting Rachel with domestic violence resources. He insisted that his marriage was being pathologized unfairly, that Rachel was an adult capable of making her own decisions, and that Steve had no right to interfere in their relationship. He accused Steve of destroying his family for the sake of dramatic television and threatened legal action for defamation and interference with his marriage. Steve's response was calm but firm. He told Michael that Rachel was indeed an adult capable of making her own decisions, which was precisely why he was ensuring she had access to professional support and accurate information to inform those decisions. He explained that he was not destroying Michael's family, but rather refusing to participate in normalizing abuse by allowing it to continue unchallenged on his platform. He made clear that Michael's threats did not concern him because everything that had occurred had been captured on camera and would demonstrate clearly what had prompted his intervention. The episode never aired in its original form. Instead, the network worked with domestic violence experts to create a special program that used portions of the footage to educate viewers about emotional abuse, coercive control, and the cycle of abuse and forgiveness that trapped many people in harmful relationships. The program included commentary from psychologists explaining the dynamics that had been visible in Michael and Rachel's interactions, resources for people who recognized similar patterns in their own relationships, and information about how friends and family members could support loved ones experiencing emotional abuse. Rachel spent several hours speaking with the advocate Steve had connected her with, processing her relationship and beginning to recognize patterns she had normalized over many years of marriage. She learned that Michael's behavior fit established definitions of emotional abuse, that his treatment of her was not her fault, and that forgiving someone repeatedly for hurting you did not make you virtuous, but rather often enabled continued harm. She was provided with resources including counseling services, legal information about her rights and options, and support groups for people experiencing emotional abuse. In the weeks following the incident, Rachel made the decision to separate from Michael and pursue counseling individually before making any permanent decisions about her marriage. She moved in temporarily with her sister and began working with a therapist who specialized in helping people recover from emotionally abusive relationships. She discovered that much of what she had believed about herself, her capabilities, and her worth had been shaped by years of Michael's criticism and manipulation. She began the difficult work of rebuilding her self-perception based on reality rather than on the distorted mirror Michael had held up to her. Michael initially refused to acknowledge any problem with his behavior, insisting that Rachel had been manipulated by Steve and the domestic violence advocate into believing her marriage was abusive when it was simply imperfect like all marriages. However, as he faced the consequences of the separation, including his children's anger and disappointment in his treatment of their mother, he eventually agreed to attend counseling. Whether he would do the genuine work necessary to change his patterns or would simply learn better ways to mask them remained uncertain. The special program that aired in place of the original episode generated intense response from viewers. Thousands of people reached out to share that they had recognized their own relationships in the dynamics between Michael and Rachel, that they had been conditioned to believe constant criticism was normal, and that they had been apologizing for being hurt, just as Rachel had done. Many people reported seeking help or making changes in their relationships after watching the program and learning what emotional abuse actually looked like beyond the physical violence they had assumed was required for abuse to be real. Domestic violence organizations reported significant increases in calls to their hotlines following the program's broadcast, with many callers specifically mentioning that they had not realized emotional abuse was a recognized form of domestic violence, or that the patterns in their relationships qualified as abuse. Therapists and counselors incorporated clips from the program into their work with clients, using the visible dynamics between Michael and Rachel to help people identify similar patterns in their own experiences. Steve Harvey received both praise and criticism for his handling of the situation. Many people applauded his willingness to intervene and to prioritize Rachel's well-being over smooth production of his show. They credited him with using his platform to educate about emotional abuse and to demonstrate that intervention was possible and necessary when witnessing harmful dynamics. However, others criticized him for overstepping boundaries, for making assumptions about a marriage based on limited observation, and for potentially causing more harm than help by forcing a confrontation that Rachel had not sought. Steve addressed these criticisms directly in subsequent interviews. He acknowledged that his intervention carried risks and that he could not know with certainty all the complexities of Michael and Rachel's relationship. However, he stood firmly by his decision, explaining that the patterns he had witnessed were clear and concerning enough that remaining silent would have been unconscionable. He pointed out that he had not made decisions for Rachel, but rather had ensured she had access to professional support and accurate information to make her own informed choices. The incident prompted broader conversations about how to recognize emotional abuse, how to support friends or family members experiencing it, and how to intervene when witnessing harmful dynamics without causing additional harm. Mental health professionals provided education about the differences between healthy conflict and abusive patterns, explaining that frequency, intent, and impact all mattered in distinguishing normal relationship challenges from abuse. 2 years after the incident, Rachel provided an update through a statement she chose to share publicly. She explained that she had completed extensive therapy, had filed for divorce from Michael, and had rebuilt her life with independence and confidence she had not experienced in many years. She credited Steve's intervention with creating the disruption necessary to break through her denial and conditioning, acknowledging that she had been so deep in the abusive dynamic that she could not see it clearly, until someone from outside reflected it back to her with clarity and concern. She also spoke about the complexity of forgiving someone who has hurt you repeatedly, explaining that she had learned the difference between forgiveness that released her from carrying anger and bitterness versus forgiveness that enabled continued abuse by signaling that harmful behavior would be tolerated. She said that she had forgiven Michael in the sense of letting go of destructive rage, but that forgiveness did not require maintaining a relationship with someone who had demonstrated through consistent patterns that they would continue causing harm. The story of Steve Harvey stopping the show when a wife forgave a husband who humiliated her became an important reference point in discussions about emotional abuse, the difference between healthy forgiveness and enabling harmful patterns, and the responsibility of people with platforms to address abuse when they witness it. It demonstrated that abuse existed along a spectrum beyond physical violence, that psychological manipulation could be as damaging as physical harm, and that intervention was both necessary and complex when addressing private dynamics in public settings. If this examination of emotional abuse and the importance of recognizing unhealthy relationship patterns has provided valuable perspective, please support our channel by liking this content and subscribing for future programs that address difficult but important topics with honesty and care. Share this story with others who might benefit from understanding what emotional abuse looks like and recognizing that constant forgiveness of repeated harm is not virtue, but often a symptom of manipulation and control. In relationships built on genuine love and respect, forgiveness is occasional and accompanies real change rather than being demanded constantly for behavior that continues unchanged. Steve Harvey's willingness to stop his show and intervene in what many would consider private family business remains a powerful example of how silence in the face of witnessed abuse becomes complicity, and how sometimes disruption is the most compassionate response to suffering.